Hello, midnight wanderers, and welcome to Dreadvane. This is where ancient whispers rise beneath a crimson sky, carrying you softly into the world of dreams and shadows. Before tonight's haunting story begins, tell me, what corner of the world are you listening from? Drop it in the comments. And if the silence of the night calls to you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell, so you'll never miss the moon's next dark secret. I grew up in a very old house. It was more than 100 years old, and even during the day it had a certain feeling to it. The floors creaked when no one seemed to be walking on them. The wooden doors sometimes moved slightly in their frames when the wind blew outside. Pipes knocked inside the walls, and the stairs made different sounds depending on which step you stood on. None of those things seemed unusual to me when I was young. It was simply the house I had always known. People who visited sometimes commented on how old it looked. They noticed the tall windows, the thick doors, and the strange way some of the rooms connected. They would ask if the house was haunted, usually as a joke. I always laughed. At that time, I did not believe anything was living in the house with us. Old homes made noises. Wood expanded and tightened. Wind moved through gaps. Animals sometimes got into the walls. There was always a normal explanation. For most of my childhood, I did not have my own bedroom. I shared space with other family members, so I was rarely alone at night. There was almost always someone nearby, and the room never felt truly empty. That changed when I turned 12. I was finally given my own bedroom. At first, I was excited. Having my own room made me feel older. I could arrange my things the way I wanted. I could close the door when I needed privacy, watch television without bothering anyone, and leave my toys and books wherever I liked. The room was not especially large, but it felt like a whole world to me. There was a bed pushed against one wall, a small television, a dresser, and enough space for my personal things. The window looked out over part of the yard. During the day, sunlight entered and made the room feel warm. At night, it was different. The old house became much louder after everyone went to sleep. Once the television downstairs was turned off and no one was talking, I could hear every small sound. The floorboards in the hallway creaked. Something occasionally tapped inside the walls. The wind touched the windows. Sometimes the house made one deep cracking noise that seemed to travel from one side to the other. I learned to ignore most of it. The first strange experience happened not long after I moved into the room. I had gone to bed upset about something. I do not remember exactly what the problem was now. At 12 years old, many things can feel much larger than they really are. Maybe I had argued with my parents. Maybe I was having trouble at school. Maybe I felt lonely. Whatever had happened, I was lying in bed trying not to cry loudly. I had turned away from the door and pulled the blanket close. The room was dark, and the rest of the house was quiet. Then I felt someone touch my hair. At first, I thought my mother had entered the room without me hearing her. The touch was gentle. It felt like fingers slowly moving through my hair, the way someone might comfort a frightened or upset child. My hair did not only feel as if it was moving, I could actually see and feel small sections of it being lifted and released. I stayed still. I did not turn around immediately because I was enjoying the feeling. Having someone play with my hair had always relaxed me. It made me feel safe and cared for. The gentle movement continued for a while. It was never rough. My hair was not pulled, and nothing hurt me. The touch was calm and patient, as though whoever was there understood exactly what would make me feel better. My sadness began to fade. Eventually, I turned around, expecting to see my mother sitting beside the bed. No one was there. The room was empty. The bedroom door appeared to be in the same position as before. I had not heard it open or close. I sat up and looked around. Nothing moved. I thought my mother might have left quickly, though that did not make much sense. She would not have come into my room, played with my hair until I calmed down, and then quietly disappeared without saying anything. Still, I accepted that explanation. It was easier than believing an invisible person had touched me. The next morning, I did not ask her about it. The experience did not frighten me enough to make it feel important. I simply assumed I had been half asleep and confused. Then, it happened again. Another night, I was lying in bed feeling emotional. Once again, I felt something touch my hair. This time, I paid more attention. I was not asleep. I could feel individual sections of hair moving. The sensation started near the top of my head and continued down toward the ends. It was slow and gentle. I listened for footsteps in the hallway. There were none. I looked toward the wall and watched the shadow of my hair move slightly against the pillow. Someone or something was physically touching it. I turned quickly. The room was empty again. I checked the doorway, but no one was standing there. I got out of bed and looked into the hallway. My parents' room was quiet. Everyone seemed to be asleep. The experience should have terrified me. If I had told someone that an invisible presence was playing with my hair, they probably would have assumed the worst. But the strange thing was that I did not feel threatened. The touch had comforted me. It had appeared when I was upset, and it stopped after I felt calmer. Nothing chased me. Nothing whispered. Nothing stood in the corner. There was only the feeling of gentle fingers moving through my hair. For a while, I continued believing it was my mother. Maybe she checked on me without saying anything. Maybe she moved so quietly that I did not hear the door. Maybe she left before I turned around. That explanation became harder to believe after my parents separated. My mother no longer lived in the house with us. I stayed there with my father, and the nights felt different after she left. The house seemed emptier. The silence lasted longer, and the rooms felt larger. The change was difficult for me. Even when parents try to make a separation easier for their children, it still affects everything. The daily routine changes. Familiar voices disappear from the house. Small things that once felt normal begin to remind you that the family is no longer the same. There were nights when I lay in bed missing my mother. Sometimes I cried. And on those nights, I still felt someone playing with my hair. That was when I became truly confused. It could not be my mother. She was not in the house. I knew my father was not doing it either. He was not the kind of person who would sit beside me and play with my hair without speaking. He also walked heavily enough that I always heard him coming down the hallway. The presence moved quietly. I never heard it enter. I never felt the mattress sink beneath its weight. The touch simply began. At first, the idea made me nervous. I would lie still and wonder what was beside me. I imagined turning around and seeing an old woman, a shadow, or some figure leaning over the bed. But whenever I looked, there was nothing. Over time, I stopped, turning around. The touch never harmed me, and it always came when I needed comfort. Part of me began to welcome it. When I had a bad day, I sometimes lay down and wondered if it would happen again. I never asked for it out loud, but there were moments when I hoped to feel it. Sometimes it came, sometimes it did not. It was never completely under my control. The strange events did not stop with my hair. I had a television in my room, and I often watched it at night. Like many children, I promised myself I would stay awake for only one more show. Then I would fall asleep before it ended. I usually left the television playing. There was no sleep timer set. I knew how the timer worked, and I checked more than once to make sure it was not active. The television was also old enough that it did not turn itself off when no one touched the controls. It would continue playing until someone pressed the power button. Still, whenever I woke in the morning, the television was off. At first I assumed my father had entered the room during the night and turned it off. That was the most logical explanation. Parents often check on their children before going to bed. He may have noticed the light and sound and decided to switch it off so I could sleep better. One morning I casually asked him if he had come into my room. He said no. I asked if he had turned off the television. Again, he said no. I thought he might have forgotten. Maybe he had been half asleep when he did it. But it kept happening. I would stay awake watching a program, feel my eyes getting heavy, and fall asleep with the sound still playing. In the morning, the room was silent. The screen was dark. Sometimes the remote was still beside me on the bed. Other times, it was exactly where I had left it on the dresser. The power button had to be pressed directly, yet I had no memory of getting up or using the remote. I considered the possibility that I was turning it off in my sleep. Maybe I woke briefly during the night, pressed the button, and forgot about it by morning. That was possible. But I was a heavy sleeper, and I rarely woke once I fell asleep. There were also nights when the remote was across the room. I would have needed to stand, walk to the television, turn it off, and return to bed without remembering any of it. I started paying closer attention. Before going to sleep, I placed the remote in a certain position. Sometimes I put a small object beside it so I would know if it had been moved. In the morning, the remote had not moved. The object remained in place. The television was still off. Again, the experience did not feel dangerous. It felt almost caring. Someone was turning off the television after I fell asleep, as though they wanted me to rest. The thought should have frightened me more than it did. An unseen presence entering a child's room at night sounds terrifying, but nothing about it felt cruel. It reminded me of what a parent might do. The final strange thing involved a teddy bear that I loved deeply. I had slept with that teddy bear for years. It was not expensive or unusual, but it was important to me. Children often become attached to one object that makes them feel secure, and that bear was mine. I held it at night when I was afraid. I took it with me when I slept somewhere unfamiliar. Its fur became worn from years of being hugged, and parts of it were no longer as soft as they had once been. Each morning, I left for school in a hurry. I did not carefully make my bed. Sometimes the blanket was twisted, the pillows were pushed aside, and the teddy bear was left near the edge of the mattress or partly under the covers. When I came home from school, the bear was always placed neatly in the middle of my pillow, not near the pillow, not somewhere on the bed. Directly in the center, as though someone had carefully arranged it. The first time I noticed, I thought my father had done it while cleaning. But he rarely entered my room, and he was not someone who made beds or arranged stuffed animals during the day. I asked him about the bear. He said he had not touched it. There was no one else living with us who would have done it. I started testing this too. One morning, I deliberately placed the teddy bear under the blanket near the foot of the bed. When I came home, it was sitting upright in the center of my pillow. Another day, I left it beside the dresser. When I returned, it was on the pillow again. I even placed it inside a drawer once. That afternoon, when I entered the room, the drawer was closed. The teddy bear was resting in the middle of the pillow. I stood in the doorway and stared at it. The room was quiet. Nothing else seemed disturbed. The bear's face was turned toward the door, almost as if it had been waiting for me to return. That was the moment I accepted that something strange truly was happening in the room. I could explain away the television. Maybe it turned itself off because of an electrical problem. I could explain the hair touching as a dream or a strange sensation caused by stress. But the teddy bear was physically moving. It had been placed somewhere else before I left. No one admitted entering the room, yet every day it returned to the pillow. The old house had belonged to other families long before mine. More than a century of people had lived there. Children had probably grown up in those rooms. Families had celebrated holidays, argued, cried, and experienced loss inside those walls. I began wondering if someone from the house's past remained there. Maybe it was a woman who had once cared for children. Maybe it was a relative I had never met. Maybe it was simply a gentle presence that noticed I was lonely after my parents separated. I never saw a full figure. I never heard a voice. No one appeared in a mirror or stood at the end of my bed. The presence communicated only through small acts. It touched my hair when I cried. It turned off the television after I fell asleep. It placed my teddy bear neatly on my pillow before I came home. Nothing bad ever happened. That is important. People often hear about ghosts that slam doors, throw objects, whisper threats, or frighten families. Whatever was in my room did none of those things. It seemed to want me to feel safe. There were nights when I became upset and waited for the familiar touch. When it came, I relaxed almost immediately. The feeling was never cold or uncomfortable. It felt warm and familiar, even though I did not know who was doing it. Sometimes I whispered thank you. I do not know whether anything heard me. After saying it, the movement through my hair sometimes continued a little longer. As I became older, the experiences happened less often. Maybe I needed less comfort. Maybe I stopped noticing. Teenagers become busy with school, friends, and plans for the future. I spent less time paying attention to the old house and more time thinking about life outside it. Still, the teddy bear sometimes moved. The television sometimes turned off, and on especially difficult nights, I occasionally felt the gentle touch in my hair. I never tried to force the presence to reveal itself. I did not use a spirit board, ask it to give me signs, or invite it to speak. Part of me was afraid that asking too many questions might change the feeling in the room. I was comfortable with the quiet kindness. I did not need a name or a face. There was also a chance that trying to contact it could bring attention from something less friendly. I had heard enough stories to know that people sometimes regretted attempting to communicate with spirits. So I left things alone. The presence stayed peaceful. Years later, I looked back and questioned every detail. Maybe my father really had turned off the television and moved the bear, but did not remember or did not want to admit it. Maybe I moved the teddy bear myself and forgot. Maybe the sensation in my hair came from air moving through the room or my head shifting against the pillow. Every event had a possible normal explanation when considered alone. But together, they created a pattern. The events began after I moved into my own room. They happened more often when I was upset or lonely. They continued after my mother left the house, and every one of them felt caring. The room never developed the heavy feeling people often describe in frightening ghost stories. I never felt watched in a threatening way. I never wanted to run out of the room. Instead, it became one of the safest places in the house. Sometimes I wonder whether the presence had once lived in that bedroom. Maybe it had cared for a child there many years earlier. Maybe the same teddy bear routine reminded it of someone it once loved. The house was old enough to hold many stories we would never know. Old photographs, records, and names could reveal who lived there, but they could never tell us everything that happened inside the home. There may have been a mother who lost a child. There may have been a grandmother who spent years caring for a family. There may have been a child who loved stuffed animals and felt afraid at night. I will probably never know. What I do know is that the presence never scared me on purpose. The first time my hair moved, I was confused. The first time the television turned off by itself, I thought something was wrong with it. The first time the teddy bear appeared on the pillow, I assumed someone in my family had placed it there. Only after the events continued did I understand that something unusual was happening. By then, I was not afraid. I had already learned its pattern. It did not appear when I was happy and surrounded by people. It came when I felt alone. It behaved less like a ghost from a frightening story and more like a quiet caretaker. Even now, I still have the teddy bear. It is old and worn, but I could never throw it away. Whenever I look at it, I remember entering my bedroom after school and seeing it waiting in the center of the pillow. I remember the careful way it was placed. The blanket might still have been messy. Books and clothes might have been scattered around the room. But the bear was always arranged neatly. That one small detail made the entire room feel cared for. I do not know whether the presence followed me when I eventually left the house. I have not experienced the same things in other places. No one plays with my hair while I am upset. The television does not turn itself off. The teddy bear stays wherever I leave it. That makes me think the presence belonged to the house, not to me. Maybe it had been there long before I was born. Maybe it remained after we moved away. I sometimes wonder whether another child sleeps in that room now. If so, I hope the presence still behaves the same way. I hope it comforts them when they cry. I hope it turns off their lights when they fall asleep. I hope it places their favorite toy somewhere safe before they return home. Living in a haunted house sounds frightening, but not every unexplained presence has to be evil. Some may simply remain because they love the home. Some may remember what it was like to care for someone. Some may see a lonely child and repeat the only acts of kindness they still know. I cannot prove that a spirit lived in my bedroom. I cannot prove that invisible hands moved through my hair or placed my teddy bear on the pillow. I only know what I experienced. My hair physically moved when no one visible was touching it. The television was turned off after I fell asleep, even though no one admitted entering the room. The teddy bear returned to the center of my pillow no matter where I left it. And through all of it, I never felt threatened. I felt comforted. Whatever shared that room with me never wanted to hurt me. It seemed to know when I was sad. It seemed to know which small things made me feel safe. Maybe it was only my imagination protecting me during a difficult time. Maybe my mind created a gentle presence because I needed one. That explanation is possible. But if it was something more, I am grateful it chose kindness. Some people remember strange events from childhood because they were terrified. I remember mine because in an old house filled with creaking floors and dark hallways. Something I could not see made sure I never felt completely alone. When I was a teenager, the internet was still new enough to feel exciting and harmless. Chat rooms were becoming popular, and programs like Men made it possible to speak with people from anywhere. At that age, it felt almost magical. You could sit alone in your bedroom, turn on the computer, and suddenly have a conversation with someone living hundreds of miles away. My best friend and I used Min almost every day. We would talk after school, late at night, and sometimes for hours at a time. Even though we saw each other in person, chatting online felt different. We could send jokes, share music, complain about school, and say things that might have felt embarrassing face to face. Back then, people did not talk as much about online safety as they do now. We knew, in a general way, that strangers could lie on the internet, but the danger did not feel real. The internet seemed separate from real life. A screen created the feeling that nothing on the other side could reach you. One day, my best friend introduced me to a girl through Men. He told me she was a year younger than I was, and lived in another state. Because the introduction came through my best friend, I assumed he knew her. I believed she was one of his friends, or at least someone he could confirm was real. That made me trust her almost immediately. She seemed friendly and easy to talk to. The conversation started with ordinary things. We discussed school, music, television, our families, and what we wanted to do in the future. She appeared interested in everything I said. The hours passed quickly. She knew how to keep the conversation going. Whenever one topic ended, she brought up another. She asked questions that made me feel as though she truly wanted to understand me. At that age, being listened to felt important. Teenagers often feel misunderstood by adults and even by their own friends. Having someone give you their full attention can make a connection seem deeper than it really is. We began talking regularly. Sometimes we chatted during the day, but most of our conversations happened at night. The rest of the house would be quiet, and I would sit in front of the computer screen, typing messages while everyone else slept. We learned a lot about each other, at least I believed we did. I told her about my school, my friends, and the places I spent time. I shared details about my family and my daily routine. I may have mentioned streets near my home, stores I visited, and where certain friends lived. Those details seemed harmless. She lived in another state, so there was no reason to think she could use any of that information against me. She also shared details about her life, though I later realized there was no way to know whether any of them were true. She sent messages about school problems and family arguments. She talked about feelings that sounded real. She knew how to make herself seem like a normal teenage girl. Nothing about the conversations made me feel that I was speaking with an older adult. As we became closer, the discussions became more personal. I had been curious about girls for a while. I wanted to understand my feelings and experiment, but I did not know how to talk about it openly. Speaking with this girl seemed safe. She was far away. She seemed to understand me, and I believed there was no risk of people at school finding out. Eventually, our messages became sexual. At first, it happened slowly. A joke became a personal question. One private confession led to another. Because she presented herself as another teenage girl, I did not feel as though anything dangerous was happening. I believed we were two young people exploring feelings together. We began sending private pictures back and forth. At the time, I did not fully understand how much control I was giving away. Once an image is sent over the internet, you cannot truly take it back. It can be saved, copied, shared, or used by someone pretending to be trustworthy. I knew none of that in a real way. I thought I was sending pictures to one girl in another state. I did not understand that the person behind the screen may have been saving everything I sent, collecting details about my life, and slowly learning how to find me. The conversations continued, and I became comfortable. That comfort was exactly what made the situation dangerous. If the person had immediately asked for my address, I probably would have become suspicious. Instead, the information came out naturally over time. I might mention where I was going after school. I might say that a friend lived a few streets away. I might complain about how long it took to walk somewhere. Each detail seemed too small to matter. Together, they may have created a map of my life. One night, I was walking down the street to a friend's house. It was an ordinary trip. I had probably walked that route many times before. I was not expecting danger. A car pulled up beside me. An older man was driving. At first, I may have thought he needed directions or wanted to ask something about the neighborhood. Then he called me by name. I stopped. Hearing my name immediately made the situation more confusing. I did not recognize him, but he seemed to know me. He started a conversation as if there were a normal reason for him to be there. I tried to understand who he was and how he knew my name. The longer he spoke, the more uncomfortable I became. Something about him felt wrong. I tried to leave. That was when he grabbed me. The situation changed so quickly that I barely had time to react. One moment, I was standing beside the road. The next, he was forcing me toward his vehicle. I fought, but he was older and stronger. He threw me into the back seat of the car. I remember the shock more clearly than anything else. My mind could not accept what was happening. This was the kind of thing people heard about in warnings, not something that happened on a familiar street while walking to a friend's house. The car started moving. I did not know where he was taking me. I did not know whether anyone had seen what happened. I did not know whether I would ever return home. Every street we passed took me farther from safety. I tried to think of a way to escape. I looked at the doors, the windows, and the road outside. I wondered whether I could jump from the car, get someone's attention, or leave some kind of sign behind. Fear made it difficult to think clearly. The man drove to a secluded place. There were no people nearby, and no easy way to call for help. He had chosen a location where he believed no one would interrupt him. There, he raped me. I will not describe the assault in detail. What matters is that he took away my control, ignored my fear, and treated me as though I were not a person. During the attack, I believed he might kill me. I had already been abducted. He had taken me somewhere isolated. There was nothing stopping him from making sure I could never identify him. I remember thinking that this could be the final night of my life. I thought about my family and my friends. I wondered how long it would take them to realize I was missing. I wondered whether anyone would ever find me. When he finally let me go, I was shocked that I was still alive. Even now, I consider myself extremely lucky that he did not kill me that night. The word lucky feels strange when describing something so terrible, but I survived. Many people in similar situations do not. I returned from that experience as a different person. The world no longer felt safe. Before the assault, I thought danger would be obvious. I imagined dangerous people as strangers who behaved strangely or looked threatening. This man had used information about me to approach with confidence. He knew my name. He knew enough to make me hesitate. That hesitation gave him the chance he needed. Afterward, I began questioning everything connected to the girl online. I thought about every conversation, every personal detail, and every picture. The person behind the screen had known things that this man could have used. Eventually, I spoke with my best friend and learned something that made the entire situation even more disturbing. He had never actually known the girl. They had only spoken online. He had never met her. He had never seen her in person. He could not confirm her age, her identity, or even whether she was a girl. When he introduced us, I assumed he was connecting me with someone he personally knew. He assumed the person online was who they claimed to be. Neither of us understood how dangerous that assumption was. The girl may never have existed. The account may have belonged to the older man who attacked me. It may have belonged to someone working with him. It is also possible that the person online gave my information to someone else. I never learned the full truth, but the connection was impossible to ignore. A stranger online had spent hours learning about me. I had shared private information and pictures. Then an older man appeared on a street I used, called me by name, abducted me, and assaulted me. He had not chosen me randomly. He knew who I was. The discovery added another kind of pain to what had already happened. I felt betrayed, even though my best friend had not meant to place me in danger. He had been fooled too. Still, I kept thinking that if he had clearly told me he had never met this person, I would have behaved differently. I might not have trusted her so quickly. I might not have shared so many details. I would never have sent private pictures. At the very least, I would have understood that I was speaking with a complete stranger. Instead, I believed there was a real-world connection that did not exist. The attacker did not only use physical force, he used patience, deception, and trust. He may have spent weeks or months preparing. He learned what I cared about. He learned what made me feel understood. He created a false person who seemed safe enough for me to open up to. That knowledge was frightening. The person I thought I knew had never been real. Every supportive message may have been part of a plan. Every personal question may have been an attempt to gather information. Every private conversation may have been written by the man who later pulled up beside me. For a long time, I blamed myself. I thought about all the moments when I could have been more careful. I should not have given personal information. I should not have sent pictures. I should have asked more questions. I should have walked away the moment the car stopped. Those thoughts can become endless after a traumatic experience. The truth is that the blame belonged to the person who lied, stalked, abducted, and assaulted me. Teenagers make mistakes because they are still learning, wanting friendship, connection, privacy, or a place to explore feelings does not make someone responsible for another person's violence. The attacker knew exactly what he was doing. He used my age and inexperience against me. He understood that a teenager might trust a friendly person online. He knew that introducing himself as another teenage girl would lower my guard. He created the circumstances that allowed him to get close. I wish I had known how easily people could pretend to be someone else online. Today, many people understand the idea of catfishing, grooming, and online predators. Schools and parents speak more openly about these risks. At the time, those conversations were not as common. The internet felt anonymous, but not always dangerous. We thought lying online meant someone might claim to be more attractive, older, younger, or more successful than they really were. We did not always think about a predator building a fake identity to find a child in the real world. The experience taught me that online danger does not always remain online. A person does not need your full address if they know enough other details. They can use the name of your town, your school, local businesses, photographs, schedules, landmarks, and information about friends. A picture can reveal more than the person sending it realizes. A window in the background, a school logo, a street sign, or a familiar building can help someone find a location. Even the times you usually come online can reveal parts of your routine. I had given the person behind that account a detailed view of my life without understanding it. They knew my name. They knew what I looked like. They knew enough about where I lived and where I went. They may have known when I would be alone. That is what frightened me most after the immediate physical danger had passed. The attack had not begun when the car stopped. It had begun much earlier, in ordinary conversations on Mess. It began when someone created a false identity. It continued each time they earned a little more trust. By the night of the assault, they may already have known exactly how to approach me. I do not know how long the man had been watching. Maybe that was the first night he saw me in person. Maybe he had followed me before. Maybe he had driven through the neighborhood and waited for an opportunity. Those questions still disturb me. There are memories that can never be completely put away. Even when life continues, they remain somewhere in the mind. A car slowing beside me could bring the fear back. Hearing a stranger say my name could make my body tense. Online conversations no longer felt harmless. Trust became difficult. I also carried shame because of the sexual messages and pictures. even though that shame should never have belonged to me. The person who deceived me wanted me to feel responsible. Predators depend on embarrassment and secrecy. They know a young person may be too afraid to explain what happened because it means admitting what they shared online. That silence protects the predator, not the victim. What happened to me was a crime. My curiosity was not the crime. Trusting someone was not the crime. The messages did not give anyone permission to touch me. The pictures did not create consent. Nothing I said online gave that man the right to abduct or assault me. It took time to understand that. When I look back now, I think about the teenager I was. I wish I could tell that version of myself to be careful without making her feel ashamed. I would tell her that people online can build believable identities over time. I would tell her to confirm how a friend knows someone before trusting an introduction. I would tell her never to share private pictures as a minor, even with someone who seems trustworthy. I would tell her not to share routines, locations, school information, or details that could be combined to find her. Most importantly, I would tell her that if something bad happened, it would not be her fault. Predators are skilled at making victims believe they participated in their own abuse. They create trust and then use it as a weapon. The girl I thought I knew may have been carefully designed for me. She was close enough to my age to seem safe, far enough away to prevent an in-person meeting, and understanding enough to encourage private conversations. It was not an accidental friendship. It may have been grooming from the beginning. I survived that night, but survival does not erase what happened. Being alive afterward does not mean everything immediately returns to normal. Trauma stays in the body and mind. It can affect sleep, relationships, confidence, and the ability to feel safe. Still, surviving meant I had the chance to continue living. I had the chance to understand that the shame was not mine. I had the chance to warn others. I do not share this story because I believe everyone online is dangerous. The internet can create real friendships and meaningful connections. But trust should not be based only on what someone says behind a screen. A person can use photographs belonging to someone else. They can create a false history. They can study the way teenagers speak. They can pretend to have the same interests, problems, and feelings. The fact that someone knows your friend online does not mean your friend knows who they truly are. That was the mistake that placed me in danger. My best friend believed the person was real. I believed my best friend could confirm it. Neither belief was based on evidence. Had I known they had never met, I would have been far more careful. I would have treated the account as a stranger. I might still have spoken to the person, but I would not have shared my private life. I would not have given them enough information to find me. The memory of the attack will always be connected to that glowing computer screen, the sound of messages arriving, and the feeling that I had found someone safe to talk to. That is what makes it so disturbing. The danger did not arrive looking dangerous. It arrived as a friendly teenage girl. It listened. It gained my trust. It waited. Then one night, an older man pulled up beside me, called me by name, and turned an online lie into something terrifyingly real. I survived, and I am grateful for that every day. But I will always wonder how many details I gave him without knowing, how long he watched me, and whether the person I trusted online had been him from the very first message. I do not think this affects me much anymore, at least not in a way I notice every day. Most of the time, I can think about it like it happened to someone else. It feels distant, like a memory from a different life. But when I slow down and remember the details, I realize how terrifying it really was. My father was a serious alcoholic. He did not only drink after work or on weekends. Drinking was part of almost every part of his life. He drove drunk, worked drunk, came home drunk, and sometimes seemed to spend entire days living in a state where alcohol controlled his thoughts and behavior. As a child, I did not understand addiction. I only understood that my father was different depending on how much he had drunk. Sometimes he came home quiet and tired. Sometimes he was friendly and acted almost normal. Other times, he was angry before anyone had even spoken to him. My mother, sister, and I learned to watch for small signs. We listened to how he opened the front door. We noticed whether he stumbled. We watched the way he placed his keys down and listened to his voice. Within a few seconds, we usually knew what kind of evening we were going to have. On the day this happened, I was around 8 or 9 years old. My sister was about 14 or 15. My father came home drunk. He was not completely unconscious or unable to walk. He could still move around and speak, but he was drunk enough that his behavior was unpredictable. From the moment he came through the door, something was wrong. He was already aggressive. There had not been an argument before he arrived. No one had done anything to upset him. He simply entered the house carrying anger with him. My sister went to greet him. I do not remember exactly what she said. It may have been a simple hello or a normal question about his day. Whatever she said, his reaction made no sense. He grabbed her by the neck. At first, I did not fully understand what I was seeing. My father and sister were standing near the entrance, and then suddenly his hands were around her throat. He was choking her. She tried to pull away, but he held on. My sister had a necklace around her neck, and during the struggle, it broke. The chain snapping gave her enough room to escape his grip. She pulled away from him, frightened and shocked. That moment should have ended everything. A normal person would have realized what they had done. A father would have seen the fear on his daughter's face and stopped. My father did not stop. He became louder. He shouted through the house, and the whole situation became chaotic. I do not remember every word because I was young and terrified. I remember the sound of his voice more than the sentences. It was deep, angry, and completely unreasonable. My mother moved quickly. She understood that we were in danger before I did. She grabbed my sister and me and rushed us toward her bedroom. My father was a chef, so he owned several good knives. They were not dull kitchen knives that could barely cut food. They were professional tools, kept sharp because he used them for work. Normally, they were only part of the kitchen. That night, they became weapons. I do not remember the exact moment he took one of the knives. Some parts of the event are missing from my memory, probably because everything happened so fast. I only remember my mother pushing us into the bedroom and closing the door. Then she locked it. Thankfully, my father did not have a key. My mother, sister, and I climbed onto the bed and held onto one another. We were crying. My sister had just been attacked by our father. I was too young to understand exactly why it was happening, but I knew the person outside the bedroom wanted to hurt us. Then we heard him at the door. The doorknob moved. He tried to open it. When he realized it was locked, he began using the knife. The blade scraped against the metal around the handle. He tried to push it into the lock. He stabbed at the wood near the doorknob. He moved the blade along the side of the door, trying to reach the part of the lock that held it shut. Each sound made us believe he was about to get inside. We sat together on the bed, holding each other as tightly as we could. I remember staring at the door. I watched the handle because I expected it to turn at any moment. Every time the knife struck the wood, my body tensed. My mother tried to keep us calm, but she was frightened too. She may have told us that the police were coming. Someone had called them, though I do not remember who. It may have been my mother, my sister, or a neighbor who heard the shouting. We knew help was on the way. The problem was that we did not know whether the police would arrive before the door opened. My father kept trying. He shouted through the door while working the knife around the lock. Sometimes the noise was fast and violent. Other times it stopped. Those quiet moments were almost worse. When he became silent, we did not know what he was doing. Maybe he had gone to find another tool. Maybe he was preparing to throw his body against the door. Maybe he had left. We listened for footsteps. Then the knife would scrape against the lock again. He kept doing this for what felt like forever. It was probably around 20 minutes. 20 minutes does not sound long under normal circumstances. But when you are waiting for a drunk man with a knife to break into the room where you are hiding, 20 minutes feels endless. Every second carries the same question. Is this the moment the door opens? My father tried picking the lock with the knife. When that failed, he tried pushing the blade along the side of the door to damage the mechanism. He slashed at the doorknob. He pulled and twisted it. I could hear his breathing and his angry voice from the other side. The door shook. I kept expecting the wood to crack. I was only 8 or 9, but I understood enough to know that we could die. I did not think of him as a father in that moment. He was a dangerous person outside the room. He had already choked my sister. He had a knife. He was trying to reach us. I believed he was going to kill us. Maybe he did not have a clear plan. Maybe his drunken mind was not capable of thinking that far ahead. But his actions were serious enough that none of us could assume he only wanted to talk. He was not knocking. He was not apologizing. He was trying to cut through the lock. I remember holding my mother and sister while we cried. My sister was still a teenager, but she felt older and stronger to me. That night, she seemed just as frightened as I was. Her necklace had broken when she escaped our father's hands. There may have been marks around her neck. She had already survived one attack, and now she was waiting for him to enter with a knife. I sometimes wonder what she was thinking. Maybe she blamed herself because the violence started when she greeted him. Maybe she thought she had said something wrong. But there was nothing she could have said that would have justified his reaction. The problem was him. The alcohol may have made the violence worse, but it was still his responsibility. My mother kept us together. She had no real weapon. She had no safe exit. The bedroom door was the only thing between us and him. She must have known how weak an ordinary interior door could be. A determined adult can kick through one quickly. Looking back, the strangest part is that my father never thought to do that. He was so drunk that he focused on the knife and the lock. He kept trying complicated ways to open the door instead of simply kicking near the handle. His drunkenness was the reason we were in danger, but it may also have been the reason he did not reach us. If he had been sober enough to think clearly, he might have broken the door within seconds. That thought still makes me uncomfortable. We survived partly because the man trying to hurt us was too intoxicated to use the easiest method. I kept listening for police sirens. At first, I heard nothing. I wondered why help was taking so long. As a child, I did not understand that even a few minutes can feel like an hour during an emergency. I imagined police cars racing toward the house. I pictured officers running through the front door. But the knife kept moving around the lock, and my father kept shouting. The sound was close enough that it felt as though he were already inside. Every time the doorknob moved, I thought the lock had failed. I do not remember everything my mother said. She may have told us to stay quiet. She may have promised that the police were coming. She may have said that our father would not get through. Parents sometimes say things they cannot guarantee because children need something to hold on to. I wanted to believe her, but I kept looking at the door. I imagined the blade appearing through the wood. I imagined my father entering and attacking my mother first because she was closest to him. I imagined my sister trying to fight him. I imagined being too small to do anything. There was nowhere to hide. The bed was only a few steps from the door. If he entered, he would reach us almost immediately. We could not escape into another room. We could not lock a second door. The only thing we could do was wait. That helplessness is one of the strongest parts of the memory. When danger is outside, you can sometimes run. When danger is a stranger, you may be able to call for help or hide. But this was our father inside our home. He knew the layout. He knew where we were. He knew there was no other exit from the bedroom that we could easily use. We were not hiding from someone searching the house. He was standing directly outside the room, trying to force his way in. Eventually, the sound of police arriving reached us. There were voices in the house. Officers shouted commands at my father. He shouted back. The knife stopped scraping against the door. Then we heard a struggle. Furniture may have moved. There were heavy footsteps, yelling, and sounds of bodies hitting walls or the floor. The police used force to control him. From what I understood later, they beat him badly while arresting him. Some people might hear that and feel sympathy. At the time, I did not. I was relieved. I wanted them to stop him by any means necessary. He had a knife and had spent 20 minutes trying to break into a room where his wife and children were hiding. The officers did not know whether he would attack them too. They treated him as a dangerous, armed man. Eventually, everything became quieter. My mother still did not open the bedroom door immediately. We waited until the police told us it was safe. When the door finally opened, we could see the damage around the lock. There were cuts in the wood. The metal near the handle was scratched and bent. The marks showed exactly how hard he had tried to reach us. Seeing the damaged door made the fear more real. While we were on the bed, the knife had been hidden behind the wood. Now we could see where the blade had struck. My father was taken away in handcuffs. I do not clearly remember watching him leave. I may have stayed in the bedroom. I may have seen him being pushed toward a police car. The memory becomes unclear after the immediate danger ended. Trauma is strange that way. The mind saves certain moments in perfect detail and erases others. I remember the necklace breaking. I remember the knife against the lock. I remember holding my family. I remember the police struggle. I do not remember what anyone ate that day or what happened the next morning. After the police left, the house was quiet. But it did not feel safe. The danger was gone, yet the room still carried what had happened. The front entrance was where my father attacked my sister. The kitchen was where he had access to the knives. The bedroom door showed the marks of his attempt to reach us. Even silence felt different. I do not know what the adults told me afterward. Maybe they explained that my father had been drunk and did not understand what he was doing. Maybe they said he was sick because of alcoholism. Maybe they promised it would never happen again. As a child, I wanted simple answers. Was my father a bad person? Did he love us? Why would someone who loved us try to break into a room with a knife? Adults often give complicated answers to those questions. They say a person can love their family and still be dangerous. They say addiction changes behavior. They say alcohol removes judgment. All of that may be true. But none of it changes the fact that we were hiding from him because we believed he would kill us. Alcohol can explain part of what happened. It cannot excuse it. My father chose to keep drinking, even though his drinking made him violent. He drove while drunk, worked while drunk, and lived in a state where his family had to guess whether he would be safe. We were children. It was not our responsibility to manage his addiction. For a long time, I wondered whether I was exaggerating what he intended. Maybe he only wanted to frighten us. Maybe he was trying to force the door open so he could continue yelling. Maybe he would have dropped the knife once he entered. But the facts remain the same. He had already attacked my sister by the throat. He picked up a sharp knife. He spent around 20 minutes trying to open a locked bedroom where 3 frightened people were hiding. He ignored our crying. He did not stop until police physically removed him. I cannot know exactly what he would have done if the lock failed. That uncertainty does not make the situation safer. If anything, it makes it worse. A person does not have to say, "I am going to kill you," for their actions to become deadly. Trying to enter a room with a knife after choking someone is enough. I still believe he may have been trying to kill us. Maybe he did not understand that clearly himself. Maybe his mind was only filled with anger and the need to reach us. But if he had entered, someone could have died. That is the truth. I sometimes say the experience does not affect me now. Maybe that is true. I do not wake from nightmares about it. I do not think about it every day, but I notice certain things. I become alert when a drunk person starts raising their voice. I pay attention to exits in rooms. I dislike hearing someone hit or shake a locked door. If a person I love becomes aggressive after drinking, I do not assume they will calm down on their own. Maybe those reactions came from that night. Trauma does not always appear as constant sadness or fear. Sometimes it becomes a habit, a way of listening, a way of watching people, a way of preparing before danger is obvious. As children, my sister and I had learned to study our father's mood. That is not a skill children should need. A child should hear a parent arriving home and feel safe. We heard the door and wondered which version of him had returned. That day, the worst version came home. My mother's actions may have saved us. She did not stay and argue with him. She did not try to calm him while leaving us exposed. She moved us into the bedroom and locked the door. She understood that the situation had passed the point where words would help. She kept us together until the police came. I sometimes think about what she must have felt while sitting on the bed. She was not only afraid for herself, she was watching her husband try to reach their children with a knife. She probably believed she would have to stand between him and us if the door opened. There was no realistic way for her to win that fight. Still, she stayed closest to us. My sister was also incredibly lucky. The necklace broke. If it had been stronger, my father might have continued choking her. The chain snapping allowed her to pull away. A small piece of jewelry may have made the difference between her escaping and losing consciousness. So many details had to go right for us to survive. The necklace broke. My mother reacted quickly. The bedroom door locked. My father did not have a key. He was too drunk to think of kicking it down. The police arrived before he found a better way inside. When people talk about surviving danger, they often imagine bravery or clever plans. Sometimes survival comes from accidents. A broken necklace, a cheap lock holding longer than expected, a violent man making the wrong choice, a police car arriving at the right moment. I do not know what happened to my father legally after that. He was arrested. Maybe he spent time in jail. Maybe charges were filed. Perhaps he promised to stop drinking. Life eventually continued because life usually does, even after something terrible. The door was repaired. The knives returned to being kitchen tools. People went back to work and school. That normal routine can make violence feel unreal. But the memory remains. I can still see the 3 of us on the bed. I can still hear the metal scraping at the lock. I can still feel the moment of waiting for the door to open. The police arrived in time. My father never entered the room. No one was stabbed. My sister survived the attack at the door. Because the worst outcome did not happen, it can be easy to describe the event as something that almost happened. But the fear was not almost real. It was completely real. For 20 minutes, we believed our father was going to get inside and kill us. A child should never feel that way about a parent. A home should not become a place where the family hides behind a bedroom door. A chef's knife should not become something children hear scraping toward them through a lock. My father was supposed to be the person who protected us from danger. Instead, he became the danger. That is the part I still find hardest to understand. There was no stranger breaking into the house. There was no monster outside. The person trying to reach us was someone whose face we knew, whose voice we recognized, and whose return home should have meant safety. Even now, when I say it does not affect me, I remember that night clearly. My sister greeted our father. He put his hands around her throat. Her necklace broke. My mother locked us inside the bedroom. We held one another and cried while he attacked the doorknob with a knife. We waited for the police, knowing the door might not hold. And while I sat on that bed, I truly believed my father was trying to kill us. A few years ago, I left a friend's house at around 3:30 in the morning. I had stayed much later than I planned, and by the time I finally got into my car, the entire neighborhood was silent. Most of the houses were dark. There were no people walking outside, no children playing, and almost no traffic moving through the streets. It was the kind of hour when even familiar places look strange. I was tired, but I was not falling asleep at the wheel. I only wanted to get home, change my clothes, and go to bed. My house was about 25 minutes away on the other side of town. The drive was easy during the day, but at that hour, the roads felt completely different. I turned on the radio quietly and started driving. At first, everything was normal. I passed closed businesses, empty parking lots, and gas stations glowing beneath bright lights. Every few minutes, another car appeared in the distance. But most roads were completely empty. Eventually, I reached one of the busiest roads in the area. During the day, that road was always crowded. There were cars in every lane, people turning into shopping centers, buses stopping, and drivers getting impatient at the traffic lights. At 3:30 in the morning, there was no one. I approached a red light and stopped. The intersection was wide and brightly lit, but the empty road made it feel isolated. There were several lanes around me, yet my car was the only one waiting. I looked at the signal. Red. I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, waiting for it to change. Then headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. A truck was coming up behind me. At first, I did not think anything of it. I was actually slightly relieved to see another vehicle because the road had felt so empty. The truck came closer. It did not slow down normally. Instead of stopping behind me at the red light, it moved into another lane and drove around my car. For 1 second, I assumed the driver planned to run the light. Then, the truck turned sideways in front of me. It stopped at an angle, partly blocking my car. The movement was so sudden that I did not understand what was happening. The truck was not positioned like someone who had lost control or made a wrong turn. It had been placed deliberately in front of me, leaving very little space to drive forward. I stared through my windshield. Then all 4 doors of the truck opened. 4 men began getting out. I was a woman alone in a car in the middle of the night. There were no other vehicles at the intersection. There were no pedestrians nearby. No open businesses stood close enough for someone to see what was happening. The situation became dangerous in less than 2 seconds. Strangely, my first reaction was anger. I have always been a little feisty, and when someone behaves aggressively toward me, part of me wants to confront them before thinking about the consequences. My first thought was to open my door and shout something like, "What the fuck are you doing?" The thought came instantly. My hand may have even started moving toward the door. For the smallest moment, I treated the situation like road rage. Maybe they were angry because they thought I had cut them off somewhere. Maybe the driver was drunk and wanted to start an argument. I wanted to demand an explanation. Then, my brain caught up with what my eyes were seeing. 4 doors had opened. 4 men were getting out. They had surrounded me intentionally on an empty road at 3:30 in the morning. This was not a normal traffic disagreement. Whatever they wanted, I did not need to stay and find out. The anger disappeared and was replaced by fear. I locked the doors, though they may already have been locked. Then I looked around quickly. The truck blocked most of the space in front of me. The men were moving away from it. I could not tell whether they had weapons. I did not wait long enough to look closely. They were already walking toward my car. I put the car into reverse. My heart was beating so hard that I could feel it in my chest and throat. I checked behind me. The road was empty. I pressed the accelerator and backed away from the truck. The men reacted. I could see their bodies turn as they realized I was not going to remain trapped. For a second, I worried that one of them might run behind my car or that another vehicle might appear unexpectedly. But I had no better option. I reversed far enough to create space. Then I shifted into drive. The red light still had not changed. I did not care. I turned the wheel and drove around the front or side of the truck through the small opening that remained. Everything happened so quickly that I barely had time to understand where the men were standing. I only knew I could not allow one of them to reach my door. As I passed them, I expected something to strike the car. I imagined a hand grabbing the handle. I imagined a window breaking. I imagined one of them jumping in front of me and forcing me to stop. None of that happened. I got around the truck and accelerated through the intersection. The light was still red behind me. I kept driving. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I looked in the mirror. The men were running back toward the truck. That confirmed that their actions had not been harmless. If they had only wanted to speak to me about a traffic problem, they could have stayed where they were. Instead, all 4 of them jumped back into the vehicle. The truck turned around and began following me. I felt a cold wave move through my body. Escaping the intersection had not ended the situation. Now I was being chased. I pressed the accelerator harder. The road ahead was mostly straight, and there were very few cars. That made it easy for the truck to remain behind me. Its headlights grew larger in my mirror. I did not know whether I should call the police immediately. My phone was somewhere in the car, but reaching for it would require taking one hand off the wheel and looking away from the road. I was afraid that even one moment of distraction could cause me to crash. I also did not know exactly where I was in relation to the nearest police station. My thoughts came quickly and without order. Do not drive home. Do not stop. Stay on the main road. Find somewhere open. Call someone. Get the license plate. Do not let them pull beside you. The strongest thought was not to lead them to my house. My home was still around 25 minutes away. If I drove there, they would know where I lived. They might follow me into the driveway. They could block me again before I reached the door. Even if I managed to get inside, I did not know whether they would leave. I needed to lose them first. The highway entrance was ahead. I decided to take it. A highway offered more speed, more exits, and the possibility of encountering other drivers or police. It also meant I would not become trapped by another red light. I entered the ramp quickly. The truck followed. That was the moment I became certain they were after me. There was no innocent reason for them to block my car, send 4 men toward me, and then follow me onto the highway. I kept checking the mirror. Their headlights remained behind me. I increased my speed, trying to create distance without losing control. The highway was dark and nearly empty. Every few miles, overhead lights created bright sections, but most of the road was surrounded by darkness. I wished there were more cars. Normally, I would enjoy having an empty highway. That night, it made me feel exposed. I could not disappear into traffic. The truck could see exactly where I was. I moved between lanes, trying to determine whether they were truly matching my movements. They were. When I changed lanes, the truck moved too. When I accelerated, it accelerated. I had no idea what the men intended to do if they caught me. Maybe they wanted to steal my car. Maybe they believed I had something valuable. Maybe they had chosen me because I was a woman driving alone. Maybe they planned to force me off the road. I did not know which possibility was correct, and I did not want to find out. I imagined the truck pulling beside me. One of the men might point a gun and order me to stop. They could hit the side of my car and push me toward the shoulder. They might follow until I ran out of gas. Each possibility made me drive faster. At the same time, I knew speed created another danger. If I crashed, I would become completely helpless. The men could stop behind me before anyone else arrived. I tried to remain controlled. My hands were tight around the wheel. My shoulders were raised. I realized I had been holding my breath and forced myself to inhale. I kept watching the road and checking the mirror every few seconds. The truck stayed behind me for what felt like a very long time. In reality, it may have been only a few minutes. Fear changes the way time feels. Every second becomes filled with decisions. Should I exit? Should I remain on the highway? Should I call the police? Should I drive toward a hospital or a 24-hour business? Should I try to get close enough to another car that someone will witness what is happening? There were no easy answers. Taking an exit might allow them to block me again at the bottom of the ramp. Remaining on the highway meant they could continue following for miles. I looked for signs showing upcoming exits. The next one approached. I stayed in my lane, trying not to reveal whether I planned to take it. The truck remained behind me. Then, as we reached the exit, it moved toward the ramp. For a second, I thought they were trying to get beside me. I prepared to change lanes again. But the truck continued onto the exit. I stayed on the highway. I watched through the mirror as its headlights moved away. The truck disappeared down the ramp. I did not immediately relax. They might return using another entrance. They could be trying to trick me into stopping. Maybe they had only taken the exit to get ahead of me somehow. I kept driving. I did not reduce my speed for several minutes. I watched every vehicle behind me. Each pair of headlights made my stomach tighten. But the truck did not return. Eventually, other cars began appearing on the highway. The sight of them gave me a little comfort. I was no longer completely alone. Still, I did not drive directly home. I took extra roads and watched carefully for the truck. I may have stopped somewhere bright and public before continuing, though some parts of the drive became a blur. All I remember clearly is checking the mirrors again and again. When I finally reached my neighborhood, I slowed down and looked for unfamiliar vehicles. The truck was not there. I pulled into my driveway and quickly got inside. Once the door was locked, my body began reacting to everything that had happened. During the chase, I had been focused on driving. At home, I started shaking badly. My legs felt weak. My hands hurt from gripping the steering wheel. I replayed the intersection in my mind. The truck driving around me. The sudden turn. 4 doors opening at the same time. 4 men stepping out. I thought about my first impulse to open my own door and confront them. That was the part that frightened me most afterward. I had almost done it. For a fraction of a second, anger had been stronger than caution. What would have happened if I had opened the door? One of them could have pulled me out before I had time to close it. Even if I stayed partly inside, they could have surrounded the car. The open door would have prevented me from reversing quickly. One of the men might have grabbed my keys or reached for the steering wheel. I would have given up the only protection I had. My car was not a perfect barrier, but the locked doors and ability to drive away gave me a chance. Opening the door would have removed both advantages. I am grateful that I stopped myself. Sometimes people talk about trusting your first instinct. My first instinct that night was wrong. It was based on pride and anger. The instinct that saved me came 1 second later. Get away. I have wondered many times who those men were. Were they looking for a specific person and mistook me for someone else? Had they been waiting for a woman driving alone? Was it some kind of attempted robbery or carjacking? Were they drunk and looking for trouble? Did they want to kidnap me? I have no answer. Their behavior was too organized to feel like a simple road rage incident. The truck drove around me and blocked my path. All 4 doors opened at once. All 4 men began getting out. Then they returned to the truck and followed me onto the highway. That looked planned. Maybe they had done it before. That thought makes the memory even worse. If I escaped, perhaps they looked for another driver later. Maybe someone else reacted differently. Maybe someone froze at the intersection. Maybe another person opened the door. I never reported enough details to know whether similar incidents had happened in the area. At the time, I was mostly relieved to be alive and home. I told people close to me what happened. Some asked why I did not drive toward a police station. Others asked whether I got the license plate. I did not. Everything moved too quickly. I was not thinking like an investigator. I was thinking like a frightened person, trying not to be surrounded. The truck's headlights were behind me, and I could not see the plate clearly. I also did not want to slow down enough to memorize details. People sometimes imagine they will notice everything during a dangerous event. The vehicle's color, the model, the faces, the clothing, the license number. Fear does not always work that way. My attention narrowed. I saw the road, the men, the open doors, and the space I needed to escape. Other details disappeared. I remember that it was a truck. I remember there were 4 men. I remember the way they began moving toward me. I remember the headlights following me onto the highway. Those were the details my mind considered necessary for survival. For a long time afterward, I became nervous at red lights late at night. If another vehicle stopped behind me, I watched it carefully. If a truck moved into the lane beside me, I felt my body tense. I began leaving more space between my car and the vehicle ahead, so I would have room to escape if necessary. At empty intersections, I checked every mirror. I also stopped assuming that a busy road was automatically safe. That night happened on a road that was normally crowded. There were businesses and traffic lights around me. During the day, hundreds of people would have witnessed the situation. At 3:30 in the morning, the same road was almost completely empty. A place can be public and still become isolated at the right hour. The silence helped the men. There were no other drivers to block their truck. No witnesses were close enough to see 4 men surrounding a woman's car. No one would have immediately called the police if they pulled me out. The timing may have been part of why they chose to act. I sometimes think about what they saw when they looked at me. A woman alone, a red light, an empty road. They may have believed I had nowhere to go. The truck was sideways in front of me. They expected me to remain stopped, confused, and afraid. Maybe they thought I would roll down the window or open the door to ask what was happening. My first thought almost gave them exactly that opportunity. Instead, I reversed. That simple choice changed the entire situation. Many drivers stopped very close to the line at an intersection. Luckily, there was enough space behind me to move. If another car had been there, I might have been trapped. If there had been a concrete divider, I might not have been able to go around. If my car had stalled, the men would have reached me. Again, survival depended on small things. An empty road gave them the opportunity to block me, but it also gave me room to reverse. The intersection gave them a place to stop, but it also gave me multiple lanes to escape through. The highway allowed them to chase me, but it also gave me enough speed and distance to avoid being surrounded again. I was fortunate. Nothing physical happened to me. The men never touched my car. They never showed a weapon that I could see. They did not follow me all the way home. Still, it remains the scariest experience of my life. People sometimes believe fear should be measured by the final outcome. Because I escaped, the incident may sound less serious. But while it was happening, there was no guarantee I would escape. I did not know whether they would catch me. I did not know if the truck was faster. I did not know if they had another vehicle waiting. I did not know what they wanted. For several minutes, every possible ending was still open. That is what made it terrifying. I could not tell myself they only wanted to scare me. I could not know they would eventually take an exit. I could not be sure that I would reach home. I was driving through the dark with 4 unknown men behind me, knowing they had deliberately tried to trap me. I also understand now that the anger I felt at first was a form of danger. Being feisty can help in some situations. It can stop a person from freezing. It can give you the courage to shout or fight. But anger can also make you step into a situation you should escape. That night, confronting the men would not have proved anything. It would not have protected my pride. It would only have made me easier to reach. I did not owe them an explanation or a chance to speak. I did not need to know why they blocked me. Their actions had already given me enough information. I was in danger. Leave. That was all that mattered. If something similar ever happened again, I would react even faster. I would keep the doors locked. I would reverse immediately if space allowed it. I would call emergency services as soon as I could safely do so. I would not drive home. I would head toward a police station, hospital, fire station, or brightly lit business with people inside. I would use the horn continuously to attract attention. These are things I know now because I have had time to think. That night, I did not have a prepared plan. I made decisions 1 second at a time. The men may never have understood how frightened I was. From their point of view, they saw a woman reverse suddenly, drive around them, and escape. Perhaps they thought I was confident. I was not. I was terrified. I only kept moving because stopping felt worse. After they took the exit, I felt relief, but not safety. I continued imagining the truck returning. Even after reaching home, I checked outside. I wondered if they had somehow followed from a distance. For several nights, sounds near the house made me nervous. A truck engine outside caught my attention. Headlights moving across the walls made me look through the curtains. Eventually, the fear became less immediate. Life returned to normal. I drove the same roads. I stopped at red lights. I visited friends at night, though I became more careful about how late I stayed. The incident moved into the past, but I still remember it clearly. I remember the empty intersection. I remember the truck moving around my car. I remember the unnatural angle as it stopped sideways. I remember every door opening. Most of all, I remember the moment my hand almost moved toward my own door. There was only 1 second between confronting them and escaping. 1 second between making myself vulnerable and using the car to protect myself. I snapped out of the anger just in time. I reversed. I drove around them. They followed me onto the highway. Then, after several terrifying minutes, they took the next exit and disappeared. I still have no idea why they chose me or what they planned to do. Maybe I am better off never knowing. The only thing I know for certain is that 4 men tried to block a woman alone at 3:30 in the morning, and they did not follow her onto the highway because they wanted to have a friendly conversation. Whatever they intended, I escaped before they could do it. And sometimes, when I stop alone at a red light late at night, I still check the mirror and make sure I have enough room to reverse. I was walking through the woods with 2 friends one afternoon. It was still bright outside, and the sun had not started setting, but the forest created its own kind of darkness. The sunlight came through the branches in thin pieces, leaving bright patches on the ground between long, deep shadows. One side of the trail could be completely lit, while the trees only a few feet away looked almost black. It was the kind of afternoon where you knew it was daytime, but the woods still felt slightly uncomfortable. We were not deep in some unknown wilderness. It was an area we had walked through before, and none of us believed we were in any real danger. We were only spending time together, talking and joking while following the trail. There were 3 of us. One of my friends had always been a little strange in a harmless way. He liked practical jokes and enjoyed making people uncomfortable for a few seconds before revealing himself. Hiding behind trees, sneaking up on someone, or pretending to disappear was exactly the kind of thing he would find funny. That is important, because it explains why we did not become frightened immediately when he suddenly started walking much faster than us. He began power walking ahead. At first, we laughed and called after him, asking why he was in such a hurry. He did not answer. He only continued moving along the path, increasing the distance between us. The trail curved through the trees, and after a short time, he disappeared from sight. The other friend and I stayed together. We did not try very hard to catch him, because we assumed he was planning something. Maybe he would hide behind a tree and jump out. Maybe he would circle around and begin following us from behind. That would have been completely normal behavior for him. We continued walking at the same pace. For the first minute or 2, nothing happened. We could hear birds above us and the sound of our feet moving over leaves, sticks, and dirt. A light wind moved through the branches, creating quiet rustling sounds all around us. The trail ahead was empty. Our friend was nowhere in sight. Then, something moved between the trees. I did not see it directly. It appeared at the edge of my vision, off to one side of the path. It looked like a human figure standing among the trees. The shape was there for only a second. When I turned my head to look, it was gone. I stopped walking. At almost the exact same time, my other friend stopped too. We looked at each other. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then one of us asked, "Did you see that?" We had both noticed it. That was what made the experience strange. If only I had seen the figure, I could have blamed the shadows. The forest was full of vertical shapes. Tree trunks, branches, and patches of darkness could easily create the appearance of a person in someone's peripheral vision. But both of us had seen something in the same general area. It seemed to be standing several feet away from the trail, partly hidden between the trees. We immediately assumed it was our friend. We laughed. The figure had disappeared as soon as we looked directly at it. which seemed exactly like something he would do. He probably noticed us turning and quickly ducked behind a tree. We called his name. There was no answer. We called again. Louder. Come out. We saw you. Nothing moved. The trees remained still, except for the leaves shifting in the wind. We continued laughing, though the laughter had become slightly nervous. We were certain he was there. He had walked ahead of us and disappeared only a few minutes earlier. He had enough time to leave the trail, move through the woods, and position himself beside us. The plan seemed obvious. He wanted us to believe he was farther ahead while he watched us from the trees. We told him the prank had failed. Still, he did not answer. We waited. I looked carefully between the trunks, trying to find part of his clothing or the outline of his body. The sunlight and shadows made it difficult to see clearly. The dark spaces seemed deeper whenever I focused on them. There were fallen branches, bushes, and uneven ground everywhere. A person could hide easily if they stayed low and did not move. My friend and I moved a little closer together. Neither of us admitted feeling uneasy. We kept treating it like a joke. Maybe he was trying not to laugh. Maybe he wanted us to walk closer before jumping out. We called him weird and told him to stop hiding. There was still no response. Eventually, we decided not to give him the reaction he wanted. If he planned to frighten us, standing there and searching for him would only make the prank more successful. We started walking again. "He'll catch up," one of us said. At the time, that seemed funny. We imagined him crouching in the woods and realizing we were leaving without him. He would have to run through the trees to catch up, probably getting branches in his face or mud on his shoes. We kept moving along the trail. For the next few minutes, we talked about what we had seen. The figure had seemed human. It was tall enough to be an adult or teenager. We could not remember any colors or details because we had only seen it from the corners of our eyes. There was no clear face, clothing, or movement. It was only a dark shape between the trees. We both agreed that it had probably been our friend. There was no other reasonable explanation. Who else would be hiding in the woods? It was the middle of the afternoon. We had not seen any other hikers, but it was possible someone else was nearby. Maybe another person had stepped away from the trail for a moment. Maybe someone was collecting wood, taking photographs, or simply standing among the trees. But a normal hiker would not disappear the instant we looked over. They also might have answered when we called out, unless they did not want to be seen. That thought entered my mind, but I did not say it aloud. I did not want to make the situation frightening. We continued forward. The trail curved several times, and our friend still had not reappeared. I began wondering how far ahead he had gone. If he had been the figure, he should have returned to the path by now, unless he was still following us from inside the woods. I looked over my shoulder. The trail behind us was empty. There were trees on both sides and no movement anywhere. I listened for footsteps away from the path. Sometimes I heard leaves shifting, but the wind could have caused that. A small branch snapped somewhere to our right. Both of us looked. Nothing was there. The fun feeling of the walk had started to disappear. We were still not truly afraid, but we had become alert. The forest no longer seemed as familiar. Every dark space looked like a place where someone could stand. I kept expecting to see the figure again. Another 2 or 3 minutes passed. By then, it had been around 4 or 5 minutes since we saw the shape between the trees. We were approaching an area where several logs had been stacked or left in a large pile beside the trail. The pile was tall enough for someone to hide behind. As we came closer, our missing friend suddenly jumped out. He appeared from behind the logs directly in front of us. Both of us reacted immediately. I jumped backward. The other friend shouted. The missing friend began laughing. He had been waiting there for us, proud of his stupid prank. For a second, I felt relieved. This was what we had expected from the beginning. He had rushed ahead, found a hiding place, and waited to scare us. Everything made sense. Then I realized there was a problem. The pile of logs was in front of us. He had been hiding farther along the trail the entire time. The figure we had seen was behind us and off to the side, several minutes earlier. There was no way he could have been both places. We asked him how long he had been hiding behind the logs. He looked confused. He said he had gone straight ahead after leaving us. He found the pile, got behind it, and waited. He had not left the trail earlier. He had not moved through the trees beside us. He had not heard us calling his name. At first, we thought he was continuing the joke. We told him to stop lying. He insisted he had been waiting behind the logs the entire time. He seemed genuinely unaware of what we were talking about. We explained that both of us had seen someone standing between the trees. We told him where it had happened and how the figure disappeared when we looked directly at it. His smile faded slightly. He asked what the person looked like. We could not give him a useful description. It had only been a dark human shape seen in our peripheral vision. We did not know whether it was male or female. We did not see a face. We did not know what the person was wearing. All we could say was that someone appeared to be standing between the trees, watching us. Our friend said it was not him. The three of us looked back along the trail. From where we stood, we could not see the area where the figure had appeared. The path had curved, and the trees blocked the view. For the first time, the situation felt truly wrong. Until then, every strange detail had been explained by our friend's personality. The missing person ahead, the shape in the woods, the silence when we called. It all seemed like part of the same prank. Now we knew the prank had not started until the pile of logs. Someone or something else had been near us earlier. We considered going back to check. None of us wanted to. There was probably a normal explanation. It could have been another hiker. Maybe the person heard us and moved away because they did not want company. They might have been using the bathroom behind the trees and became embarrassed when we noticed them. Perhaps someone had been watching wildlife or walking on a smaller path we could not see. There were countless innocent possibilities. Still, none of them felt completely satisfying. Why had both of us noticed the figure at the same time? Why did it disappear the moment we turned? Why had it seemed to be standing still, facing our direction? The image had been brief, but the feeling was clear. We had not seen someone simply walking through the forest. It looked like someone hiding and watching us. We stayed on the main trail and continued walking. The three of us remained close together now. Our friend still joked about the story, but he looked into the trees more often than before. The other friend and I kept comparing what we had seen. We stood at slightly different angles when the figure appeared, yet we both placed it in the same location. That made it harder to dismiss as an illusion. If sunlight and shadows created the shape, why did it disappear so completely when we turned? A tree trunk would still have been there. A bush would not vanish. Maybe something had moved quickly behind one of the larger trees. There were many places to hide. The question was why anyone would do that. I imagined a person following us from deeper in the woods. Perhaps they had noticed three young people walking alone and decided to watch. When our friend hurried ahead, the two of us left behind became easier targets. The stranger could have stepped closer, believing we were distracted. Then we noticed them. Maybe our laughter and calling made the person realize we were expecting someone else. They could remain hidden without us immediately becoming afraid. That possibility made my stomach feel uneasy. We had called toward the figure and invited it to come out. We believed it was our friend. If the person had stepped onto the trail, we might have laughed and walked toward them before realizing our mistake. Maybe they understood that. Maybe they chose not to reveal themselves because there were two of us. I looked behind us several more times during the walk. I never saw the figure again. We did not hear clear footsteps or see branches moving. The rest of the journey was completely normal. Eventually, we left the woods and returned to a more open area. The sunlight felt brighter there. Once we were away from the trees, the story became easier to laugh about. We told ourselves it was probably a person walking through the forest. Our friend continued insisting he had nothing to do with it. We believed him. His prank had been simple. He walked ahead, hid behind a pile of logs, and waited. There was no time for him to return, stand beside us, disappear, run far ahead again, and hide without being heard. The timing did not work. The person in the woods was someone else. For a while, we tried to identify who it could have been. Was there another trail nearby? Could a runner or hiker have crossed through that area? Were there houses beyond the trees? Maybe a worker was checking the forest or clearing branches. None of us knew. We had not seen any vehicles parked nearby. There had been no sounds of tools or conversation. The figure never spoke. That silence stayed with me. A normal person who accidentally frightened two walkers might say something. They could call out that everything was fine. They might apologize or continue on their way. This person remained hidden. Unless there had never been a person at all. Peripheral vision is not reliable. The human brain is designed to notice possible movement at the edges of sight, but it does not always interpret shapes accurately. A shadow moving across a trunk can become a person. Two branches can form the outline of shoulders. Leaves shifting in the wind can look like someone stepping backward. Maybe my friend reacted because he saw me turn, and his brain created the same figure. Maybe one of us said something first without remembering, influencing what the other thought they saw. That explanation is possible. It is probably the most reasonable one. But neither of us remembers reacting to the other. We both stopped and turned because we saw movement. We both pointed to the same place. We both believed the shape was our missing friend before either of us explained what we had seen. Years later, I can still picture that section of forest. The afternoon sun, the dark spaces between the trunks, the quick movement at the edge of my vision. Then, nothing. I do not claim it was a ghost or anything supernatural. There was no strange sound, no impossible event, and no later discovery connected to the woods. We saw a figure for a second, and then it disappeared. That is all. But the mystery comes from the timing. If our friend had jumped from behind the logs before we saw the shape, we would have assumed another hiker was nearby. If we had never found him, we might have believed he was the person between the trees. Instead, he was ahead of us the entire time, waiting to complete the exact kind of prank we had already blamed on him. The truth arrived only a few minutes after the sighting. The person we thought we saw was not the person we thought it was. Sometimes I wonder whether the figure continued watching after we walked away. Maybe a stranger stood behind a tree while we laughed and called our friend's name. They may have listened as we convinced ourselves there was nothing to fear. They could have followed at a distance until the three of us were together again. Perhaps the appearance of our third friend made them leave, or maybe the person had no harmful intentions at all. They might have been just as surprised to see us. We will never know. The experience changed the way I think about seeing people in the woods. Forests create strange visual tricks. Sunlight, shadows, movement, and distance can make ordinary objects appear alive. But forests are also places where a real person can stand only a few feet away without being noticed. The trees break up the shape of the body. Dark clothing blends with the shadows. Someone who does not move can become almost invisible. When you look directly at the right tree, the person can step behind it and disappear. That is more unsettling to me than the idea of a ghost. A ghost would belong to a story. A real stranger hiding and watching would belong to reality. I still talk to those friends occasionally, and whenever the walk comes up, we remember the same thing. Our strange friend rushing ahead. The figure between the trees. The silence when we called. Then his face appearing from behind the logs, farther along the path. He had no idea why we looked more frightened than amused. To him, the joke began and ended at the pile of wood. To us, it had started several minutes earlier. We asked who had been hiding in the forest. None of us had an answer then. We still do not. Maybe we saw an innocent hiker. Maybe we saw a shadow that our minds turned into a person. Maybe someone was following us. Whatever it was, both of us noticed the same figure, while the only person we expected to be hiding was several minutes ahead. That was the moment the walk stopped feeling funny. Our friend's prank gave us a simple answer for why he disappeared. It gave us no answer for the person we had already seen. So the question has remained with me ever since. Who was the other man hiding in the woods? I do not know whether this fully counts because most of it began in dreams. Nothing physically attacked me, and there was no real person hiding in my home. Still, the things I saw felt completely real at the time, and some of those images have remained clearer in my memory than events that actually happened. When I was younger, somewhere between 9 and 11 years old, I suffered from terrible night terrors. They were not ordinary bad dreams. Most children have nightmares where something chases them or a monster appears in the dark. Usually, they wake up frightened, realize they are safe in bed, and slowly forget what happened. Mine did not end when I woke up. The fear followed me into the daytime. Sometimes the people or creatures from a nightmare would appear again while I was fully awake. I knew they were not real, but seeing them still terrified me. They could appear in a hallway, in another room, outside a window, or somewhere in the yard. They never stayed forever. Usually, after appearing once during the day, they would disappear and not return. But while they were there, they looked real enough that my body reacted as though I were standing in front of an actual person. I would freeze. My heart would pound. My breathing would become fast. I would try to remind myself that the figure was only connected to the nightmare, but logic did not make the image disappear. I could know something was not real and still be terrified of it. The worst night terror I remember involved a group of children. The dream took place on an old, isolated property far away from any road or town. It felt like somewhere no one would ever visit by accident. There were trees surrounding the land, but they did not make the place beautiful. They made it feel trapped and hidden. The sky was dark and gray. I cannot remember whether it was supposed to be evening or whether there was simply no sunlight in the dream. Near the center of the property stood an old wooden shack. The building looked abandoned. The boards were rotting, and parts of the roof seemed ready to fall in. The windows were either broken or covered. There was dirt around the building instead of grass. Everything looked dead. The most disturbing thing near the shack was a huge pile of children's shoes. There were hundreds of them. Some were small enough to belong to very young children. Others were larger, but still clearly not made for adults. The shoes were different colors and styles, but all of them looked dirty and old. They had been thrown together without care. In the dream, I understood immediately that the shoes belonged to children who had been brought to that property. I also knew something terrible had happened to them. Many of the children had been badly injured and mistreated. Some could no longer walk because parts of their legs or feet were missing. They wore torn clothing that looked more like rags than real clothes. Their faces were bruised and dirty. They looked weak, hungry, and exhausted. The dream did not show me exactly who had harmed them or why. That made it worse. There was no clear enemy to escape from. The entire property felt responsible. It was as though the land itself had been built to hide suffering. I had to walk through the area alone. I do not know why I was there. Dreams rarely explain those things. I only knew I had to move forward, passing the shack and walking between different parts of the property. Everywhere I went, I saw more children. Some sat against the walls, some were lying on the ground. Others tried to move toward me when they noticed me. They reached out their hands. They cried and begged me to help. Their voices came from every direction. Please help us. Do not leave. Take me with you. I wanted to help them. I truly did. But I was a child too. I did not have a vehicle, a telephone, or any adults with me. I could not carry all of them. There were too many. Whenever I tried to move toward one child, several others began crying louder. They all wanted to be chosen. They all believed I might be their only chance to escape. I remember feeling crushed by the responsibility. If I helped one, I would leave the others behind. If I went to find help, I feared the children would be gone when I returned. If I stayed, whoever had hurt them might come back and find me too. The dream forced me to keep walking. The children continued reaching for me as I passed. Some grabbed at my clothes. Others crawled toward me. Their faces were filled with hope when I approached, and complete despair when I moved away. I tried to tell them I would return. I promised I would find someone. But even inside the dream, I knew they did not believe me. I did not believe myself either. The old shack remained nearby the whole time. I felt that someone was watching from inside it. I never clearly saw a person in the window, but the darkness behind the boards felt alive. I imagined an adult standing there, waiting for me to make a mistake. Every time the wood creaked, I expected the door to open. I thought someone would come out and drag me inside. Still, the children's cries made it impossible to run away without guilt. I kept moving through the property, looking for a gate, a road, or any way to escape. There was none. The trees seemed to form a wall around the land. Whenever I walked toward the edge, I somehow ended up back near the shack in the pile of shoes. The same children appeared again. Their arms reached toward me. They cried. They asked why I had not helped them yet. The dream continued like that until I woke up. I opened my eyes in my own bedroom. The room was dark but familiar. My bed was beneath me. The walls were where they belonged. There were no crying children. There was no shack. There was no pile of shoes. I knew I had been dreaming. That should have brought relief. Instead, the fear stayed inside me. I could still hear the children's voices. I could still see the dirt on their faces. I could still feel their hands reaching for my clothing. The images were so clear that I did not want to close my eyes again. I believed that if I fell asleep, I would return to the property. I may have gone to my parents' room or stayed awake until morning. I do not remember that part clearly. What I do remember is the following day. The sun was out, and everything around my house looked normal. There were no dark woods or abandoned buildings. It should have been impossible to feel afraid in daylight. but the nightmare remained in my mind. I thought about the children throughout the morning. I tried distracting myself by watching television, eating, or moving around the house. Nothing worked. Every quiet moment brought the images back. At some point, I went outside. Our backyard was familiar. I had played there many times. I knew every part of it, from the grass to the wall of the house. As I walked through the yard, I saw someone sitting beside the building. It was a little girl. She was one of the children from the nightmare. She sat on the ground close to the wall, completely still. She wore the same torn clothing. Her hair was messy. Her face looked pale and tired. She had no feet. I stopped. The dream had ended hours earlier, but she was now sitting in my backyard in full daylight. I knew she could not be real. No part of me believed an injured child had somehow traveled from a nightmare into my home. Still, I could see her. She looked as solid as the house behind her. The sunlight fell across her body. She created a shape against the ground. Her eyes were open, and she was staring directly at me. I wanted to run. I also felt unable to move. My mind kept repeating that she was not real. It is only from the dream. There is no one there. Keep walking. The girl did not reach for me. She did not cry or ask for help like the children in the nightmare. She only watched. That silence was worse. I began walking toward the back door. To reach the house, I had to pass close to where she was sitting. I kept my eyes on her. She kept her eyes on me. We stared at each other the entire time. As I moved, her head may have turned slightly to follow me. I cannot be certain whether it truly moved or whether my frightened mind created the movement. I knew that looking away would probably make the image disappear, but I was afraid that if I stopped watching, she would move closer. So I continued walking while maintaining eye contact. Every step felt slow. The distance to the door seemed much longer than normal. I passed her. She remained beside the house. I reached for the handle, opened the door, and went inside. Then I shut the door behind me. I did not look through the window to see if she was still there. I walked into the living room and sat on the couch. Once I was safely inside, I began crying. I did not know how to explain what I had seen. How could I tell an adult that a girl from my dream had been sitting outside? They might think I was still asleep. They might tell me I imagined it. They would have been correct, but that did not make the experience less frightening. The image had appeared while I was awake. I had seen it clearly. It had looked at me. Even now, about 20 years later, I can still picture the exact place where she sat. I remember the wall behind her. I remember the position of her body. I remember the way her eyes followed me. Many real memories from childhood have become blurry. I have forgotten birthdays, school days, teachers, and conversations. But I have never forgotten that girl. For a long time after that, I avoided looking toward that part of the backyard. Even when I knew there was nothing there, I expected to see her again. Sometimes I would pass a window and check the yard quickly. I feared she might be sitting in the same place. She never appeared again. That was often how the daytime visions worked. A person or image from the nightmare would appear once. After that, it would be gone. But the fact that it disappeared did not make me feel safe. It only taught me that I never knew when the next nightmare would leave something behind. Sleeping became frightening because I did not only fear the dream itself, I feared what I might see the next day. Other children could wake from a nightmare and receive comfort by looking around the room. I could not completely trust being awake. The figures might follow me into daylight. Another night terror involved war. I do not remember the complete story of that dream as clearly, but I remember the bodies. There had been a battle. soldiers were dead or badly injured. The ground was covered with people wearing uniforms. There were weapons, damaged buildings, and smoke. The dream felt loud and confusing. There were explosions somewhere in the distance, but I could not see who was fighting. Again, I was only a child inside the dream, walking through something no child should witness. The soldiers lay everywhere. Some looked very young. Others stared upward without moving. I tried not to look at their faces, but there were too many of them. No matter where I turned, another body was there. I woke frightened and sick. The images followed me into the day. This time, instead of one little girl in the backyard, I began seeing dead soldiers around the house. One might be lying near a doorway. Another would appear beside furniture. I would walk into a room and see someone on the floor for a second. Sometimes they appeared at the edge of my vision. Other times I saw them clearly enough that I had to stop. The figures did not move. They were not trying to attack me. But seeing bodies throughout my home was horrifying. Home was supposed to be the place where the nightmare ended. Instead, the war seemed to have followed me inside. I could be walking through an ordinary hallway and suddenly see a soldier lying there. I knew the floor was actually empty. I knew I could step forward without touching anyone. Still, my body resisted. I would move around the place where the person appeared, even while telling myself there was nothing to avoid. That dream affected me for a long time too. I became afraid of quiet rooms. I did not like looking into dark corners or entering a space alone. I worried that another figure would appear. Daylight helped, but it did not completely protect me. The little girl had appeared outside beneath the sun. The soldiers could appear in bright rooms. These were not shadows mistaken for people in the middle of the night. They were clear images created by my mind after I was already awake. At that age, I did not understand how the brain could do something like that. I thought seeing something meant it had to exist in some way. Adults said dreams were not real, but that answer did not explain why I could still see the people afterward. I wondered whether part of the dream had remained inside my eyes. Maybe my brain had not fully woken up. Perhaps the people were ghosts using the nightmares to reach me. I did not know. Without an explanation, my imagination created worse possibilities. I was afraid to tell people because I thought they might believe something was wrong with me. I did not want adults to look at me differently. I also worried that speaking about the figures would make them stronger. Children sometimes believe that naming a frightening thing gives it power, so I often kept the experiences to myself. I would see someone who was not there, wait for the image to disappear, and continue with the day. The fear remained private. Looking back as an adult, I understand that the visions were probably connected to the night terrors and the way my brain moved between sleeping and waking. The mind can create extremely realistic images. A frightened child can continue seeing parts of a nightmare even after the dream ends. Knowing that now gives me an explanation. It does not change how real the figures felt then. The little girl did not look transparent. She did not appear like a weak memory floating in my thoughts. She looked as though she was physically sitting in the yard. The soldiers looked as though they had fallen inside my home. My brain created details, positions, and expressions. It placed them in real spaces. That is what made the experiences so disturbing. A nightmare is limited by sleep. A hallucination does not respect that boundary. When the dream entered the daytime, I lost the simple comfort of waking up. The figures could appear anywhere. I think that is why these memories remain more frightening than many real events from my life. During a real danger, you can sometimes escape or receive help. Someone can check the room and tell you there is no intruder. A door can be locked. The police can be called. But how do you escape something created by your own mind? No one else can see it. No one else knows exactly where it is standing. You can leave the room, but the next image may appear somewhere else. You can close your eyes, but you know the nightmare is waiting there too. There was no safe direction. Sleep brought the dreams. Waking brought the people from them. I remember becoming exhausted because fear made resting difficult. I wanted to sleep like a normal child. At the same time, I did not want to see another terrible place. I did not want to meet more people who would remain after morning. Whenever I woke from a nightmare, I studied the room immediately. I checked the corners. I looked toward the doorway. I listened for movement. Even when the bedroom was empty, I knew the vision might come later. It could wait until breakfast, school, or the afternoon. The delay made the fear last all day. Sometimes nothing appeared. Those were the better days. Other times, a face from the nightmare would show itself when I least expected it. Then, after that single appearance, the fear would slowly weaken. The image would not return. I have wondered why my mind worked that way. Why did the figures appear only once after some nightmares? Why did seeing them in the daytime seem to complete something? Perhaps my brain needed a final image before letting the dream go. Maybe the fear remained active until I faced it while awake. I will probably never know. The night terrors eventually became less common as I grew older. The daytime images stopped. I began sleeping more normally. Years passed without seeing anyone from a dream standing in a real place. Still, I never forgot the experiences. Certain images in movies or stories can bring them back. An old shack in the woods, a pile of abandoned shoes, a child sitting silently beside a house, soldiers lying in a hallway. Those things connect immediately to memories from when I was 9 or 10. The fear does not return with the same strength, but the images remain sharp. The little girl is the clearest. She did not threaten me. She did not chase me. She did not say a single word. She only watched me walk past. That quiet stare has remained in my mind for 2 decades. Sometimes I think about what frightened me most in the dream. It was not only the injuries or the old property. It was the children asking me to save them. I was too young and too powerless. They needed something from me that I could not provide. Then one of them appeared the next day. Perhaps my mind created her because I felt guilty for leaving the children behind. She sat near my house as though she had followed me home to remind me. Maybe she was waiting for the help I had promised. That explanation is not supernatural, but it is still disturbing. A child's mind can turn guilt into a person. They can place that person in the backyard and make her stare. Even now, I sometimes wish I had looked back through the window after entering the house. I wonder whether she would still have been there. I wonder whether she disappeared the moment the door closed. At the time, I could not risk seeing her again. I sat on the couch and cried until the fear passed. No one standing nearby would have understood why. Outside, the backyard was probably completely empty. The sun was shining. The wall was only a wall. But in my memory, she is still sitting there. I know she was not real. I knew it even while I saw her. That did not stop us from locking eyes. It did not stop me from feeling watched. It did not stop me from crying once I was inside. People sometimes say it was only a dream, as though that makes the fear less important. Dreams can leave real memories. They can change the way a person sees a room or a familiar place. They can create images strong enough to remain for decades. My nightmares ended when I woke up. The people inside them did not always leave immediately. For a little while, they remained in the world with me. The injured children, the silent girl in the yard, the soldiers lying throughout the house. They were not real people, but the fear they caused was real. And of all the frightening things I remember from childhood, nothing compares to knowing I was awake, knowing the little girl could not exist, and still seeing her sitting beside my home, staring directly into my eyes. About a year ago, I was trying to convince my alcoholic ex-boyfriend to get help. By then, his drinking had already become much worse than anything I had seen before. Alcohol controlled nearly every part of his life, and I kept believing that if I stayed patient, spoke gently, and reminded him who he used to be, I might somehow help him recover. Instead, he turned on me. What began as an attempt to help someone I loved became a week in which I was held against my will, repeatedly assaulted, and nearly killed. The situation started after we attended a college football game with my family. My ex was completely drunk and acting belligerent. He was loud, aggressive, and impossible to reason with. My family could see that something was wrong, and they could no longer tolerate his behavior. I was embarrassed, but I was also worried about him. I had become used to managing his drinking, apologizing for him, calming him down, and trying to prevent his actions from becoming worse. That day, nothing I did worked. Afterward, we returned to the hotel where we were staying. His anger continued building. I realized I needed to leave and tried to reach the door. Before I could get out, he grabbed me from behind. He wrapped his arm around my neck and pulled me into a chokehold. My feet struggled against the floor, but I could not get free. I tried to pull his arm away, yet his grip only became tighter. I could not breathe. He told me that if I ran, he would kill me. Then he said he would go after my family and kill them too. I believed him. People sometimes ask why a victim does not simply leave. They imagine there is always an open door, a working phone, or a clear chance to run. They do not understand what it is like when the person hurting you has already shown that they can overpower you and has threatened everyone you love. I stopped trying to escape because I was afraid that leaving would put my family in danger. For the next week, I stayed with him while we moved from hotel room to hotel room. I was never allowed to speak to anyone without him being present. I could not talk privately to hotel employees. I could not use my phone without him watching. I could not call my parents and explain what was happening. Even when I held my phone, he wanted to know who I was texting and what I was saying. He controlled every conversation and every movement. During that week, he raped me, choked me, and threw me around as though I were not a person. He treated me like something he owned. I stopped knowing which version of him I would face from one moment to the next. Sometimes he cried and apologized. Sometimes he said he loved me. Then something small would anger him, and he would become violent again. His alcoholism reached the point where he could barely leave the hotel room. He was almost constantly intoxicated. He smelled like alcohol all the time, as though it had soaked into his skin and clothes. There were periods when he was too drunk to speak clearly or walk normally. When we needed to move to another hotel, he had to reduce his drinking gradually so he could function long enough to check out, speak to staff, and enter another building without attracting attention. He understood that he needed to appear normal in public. That was one of the most disturbing things. Inside the room, he acted completely out of control. He threatened me and hurt me, but when other people were present, he could make himself seem calm enough to hold a conversation. He knew how to hide what was happening. I watched him speak politely to hotel staff after spending hours terrorizing me. He could smile, answer questions, and behave like an ordinary guest. No one looking at him would have known what he had done behind the closed door. I spent the entire week looking for a chance to escape. I knew I had to be careful. If I ran while he was able to follow me, he would catch me. He had already proven that he was stronger than I was. I also believed his threats against my family. I worried that escaping would send him directly to their home. I tried to stay calm and wait for an opening. Eventually, he destroyed my phone. He became angry because I had been texting without showing him every message. He believed I was trying to contact someone or ask for help. He broke the phone so I could no longer communicate without his permission. That act unexpectedly created the opportunity I needed. I convinced him that I had to replace it. I told him my father could take me to get a new one. At first, I expected him to insist on coming with us. But he was too drunk to function normally, and he did not want my father to see him in that condition. Even in his confused, alcohol-damaged thinking, he understood that appearing drunk in front of my family might expose what was happening. So he allowed me to leave with my dad. The moment I saw my father, I felt a small part of myself return. I had been trying to hide the abuse, but apparently I looked terrible. I was exhausted, frightened, and physically injured. My father convinced me to come home. For the first time in days, I felt safe. I was back in a place where my ex could not control every movement. My family was nearby. I had a new phone. I could speak without someone watching me. That evening, my godparents came over for dinner. I told my godmother what had happened. Once I began speaking, the story came out. I told her about the hotel rooms, the threats, and the violence. She immediately told my father and godfather. They made it clear that I would never have to return to him. They said they would protect me. They told me the relationship was over and that I was safe. I should have listened. But abuse changes the way a person thinks. I still loved the man I believed my ex could be. I remembered the good moments and the apologies. I felt sorry for him because of his addiction. I wanted to believe the alcohol was the real enemy and that somewhere beneath it, the person I loved still existed. I contacted him and told him my family knew what he had done. He began speaking gently. He apologized. He told me what I wanted to hear. Manipulation was one of the things he did best. He could hurt me, frighten me, and then make me feel guilty for leaving him alone. He convinced me to bring him some laundry that was still at my father's house. It seemed like a small thing. I told myself I would remain in the car, hand him the clothes, and leave. My family knew the truth now. My father and godfather were not people he would want to challenge. I believed that knowledge would stop him from becoming violent again. I was wrong. I drove to his house and parked in the driveway. My car window was broken at the time, so it could not close properly. I waited for him to come outside. When he appeared, he reached through the broken window or opened the door and got into my car. I told him to take the laundry and leave. He refused. He stayed inside the vehicle, talking, arguing, apologizing, and trying to control the conversation. For almost 2 hours, I tried to make him get out. I wanted to go home. The longer he remained there, the more trapped I felt. I did not want to become aggressive because I knew what he had already done to me. I did not hit him or try to fight him. I only tried to push him gently toward the door. I thought that because my family now knew about the abuse, he would understand that hurting me again would bring serious consequences. Instead, he climbed into the driver's side with me. He forced himself into my seat, crowding my body against the interior of the car. Then, he put both hands around my neck. His skin felt cold and clammy. His fingers tightened. At first, I waited for him to let go. A part of me still believed he was trying to frighten me rather than kill me. But he continued squeezing. I could not breathe. I pulled at his hands. I tried to speak. I tried to plead with him. Nothing came out. My throat could not produce words. I looked into his eyes. He stared directly back at me. He was smiling. That expression has stayed with me. There was no confusion in his face and no sign that he did not understand what he was doing. He watched me struggling for air, and he smirked. My vision began narrowing. The world around him faded, until only his face remained clear. Images moved through my mind. I saw the people I loved. I remembered moments from my life and the events that had brought me to that driveway. Everything seemed to happen at once. Then my vision became a small tunnel. Finally, everything went black. I do not know how long I was unconscious. I woke because I could hear myself breathing. It was the strange, heavy breathing people sometimes make after being knocked unconscious. At first, I did not know where I was. The first thing I saw was his garage door through the windshield. His hands were still around my neck. He was no longer squeezing hard enough to stop my breathing, but he had not released me. For a moment, I believed I had dreamed the attack. Then panic returned. I began crying and making noise. He tightened his hands again. My air disappeared. He warned me that if I made another sound, he would not release me the next time. Then he pushed me out of the car. I fell onto the ground. He told me to put his dog in the backyard. The dog had been outside near us during the entire time I sat in the driveway. Even after nearly killing me, he expected me to follow his instructions. I moved toward the dog, pretending to cooperate. My phone and car keys were still on the seat. I knew this might be my only chance. I reached back carefully. Then I grabbed both the phone and keys and ran. The moment he understood what I was doing, he began shouting. I called the police while running through the neighborhood. He yelled at me not to make the call. He followed and searched for me while insulting me. He called me weak. He said only weak people called the police. He said I had never loved him. He tried to use shame and guilt to make me stop running. I kept moving. I could barely speak to the dispatcher. All I managed to say at first was, "Help me, please." I repeated it while trying to breathe. My throat hurt from being strangled, and I was terrified he would find me before officers arrived. I found a bush and hid inside or behind it. I crouched as low as I could and whispered into the phone. The dispatcher stayed with me while I explained what had happened. My ex continued walking through the neighborhood looking for me. I could hear him shouting my name and saying terrible things. Every time his voice grew louder, I believed he had found my hiding place. I tried not to move. Branches pressed against me, and I kept the phone close so its light would not reveal where I was. The wait for police lasted 23 minutes and 27 seconds. I know the exact length because every second felt important. It was the longest wait of my life. I did not know whether my ex would search the bush. I did not know whether he had a weapon. I did not know if he would return to his house, get into another vehicle, or head toward my father's home. I only knew that he had already choked me until I lost consciousness and warned that he would kill me if I made noise. Eventually, he went back inside his house. I remained hidden. The dispatcher told me officers were coming, but the minutes continued passing. When the police finally arrived, I came out. I gave them my statement. They photographed the marks and injuries on my body for evidence. Speaking about the attack while standing near the place where it happened felt unreal. I was exhausted and shaking, but I tried to explain everything clearly. While I was speaking with the officers, a taxi drove into the cul-de-sac. The officers noticed it. They asked whether anyone on that street owned or regularly drove a taxi. I said no. The taxi continued toward my ex's house. We kept talking, but the officers remained aware of it. 4 or 5 minutes later, the same taxi came back out of the street. It turned in the direction of my father's house. One of the officers immediately got into his patrol car and followed it. He stopped the taxi and apprehended my ex. After finishing my statement, I drove home. A few blocks from my father's house, I saw the taxi on the side of the road. The police officer was searching the back of the empty cab. I could not see into the rear seat of the patrol car, but I felt certain my ex was inside it. I imagined him watching me drive past. Later, I learned that he had been found in the taxi carrying a baton. He had been heading toward my father's home, the place where he expected me to be. That discovery confirmed that his threats against my family had not been empty words. If the officer had not noticed the taxi, my ex might have reached the house. My father, godfather, and godmother were there. I was on my way there. No one knows what he planned to do with the baton. I do not like imagining the answer. He was arrested and charged with offenses related to physically injuring me and intending to cause harm, along with another lesser charge. I did not press charges myself. I did not attend his hearings. At the time, I could barely function. I was afraid, confused, and emotionally tied to the person who had nearly killed me. I could not sleep properly. When I did sleep, I had nightmares about being attacked. I would wake up believing hands were around my neck again. Every sound outside made me wonder if he had come back. I knew logically that cooperating with the legal process might protect me and possibly protect someone else in the future. But trauma does not always allow a person to behave logically. I had spent so long protecting him, making excuses for him, and believing I could save him, that I did not know how to suddenly become the person trying to punish him. I felt sympathy for his addiction even after everything he did. I believed the man I loved was trapped beneath the alcohol. That empathy kept pulling me toward him, even when being near him placed my life in danger. I once called it Stockholm Syndrome. I do not know whether that is the correct clinical term. It may have been a trauma bond created through fear, abuse, apologies, and repeated promises. Whatever the name, my thinking was not clear. I loved someone who treated me as though my life had no value. That does not make me stupid. Abusers do not remain cruel every second. They can be loving, gentle, and apologetic. They learn exactly what to say to make the person they hurt doubt themselves. They create hope, then use that hope as a chain. I went back because I believed his words. I brought him laundry because I wanted to believe the danger had passed. I thought knowing my family was aware would control him. Instead, he strangled me until I became unconscious and later took a taxi toward my father's home carrying a weapon. For a long time, I felt ashamed of my decisions. I blamed myself for returning. I told myself I should have known better. But shame belongs to the person who chose violence. Bringing someone their clothes is not permission to be attacked. Loving an abusive person is not consent to be harmed. Trying to help an addict does not make the victim responsible for what the addict does. I made decisions while frightened, controlled, and emotionally manipulated. He made decisions too. He chose to stop me from leaving. He chose to threaten my family. He chose to assault me repeatedly. He chose to destroy my phone. He chose to enter my car and refuse to leave. He chose to put his hands around my neck. He chose to continue squeezing until I lost consciousness. He chose to tighten his grip again when I cried. He chose to search for me while I called for help. He chose to enter a taxi with a baton and travel toward my family's home. Those choices were his. Surviving the relationship did not instantly make me feel strong. At first, survival felt like fear, sleepless nights, and confusion. It felt like checking doors and windows. It felt like remembering his hands whenever someone touched my neck. It felt like wondering whether he would appear outside my father's house. It felt like blaming myself for not leaving sooner. Over time, I began to understand survival differently. I escaped from a hotel room situation that had become a prison. I found a way to regain access to my family. I told someone the truth. I grabbed my phone and keys while lying on the ground. I ran. I called for help even while he told me that calling the police made me weak. I hid and stayed alive until officers reached me. Calling for help was not weakness. It was one of the strongest things I had ever done. He wanted me to believe strength meant enduring his violence without telling anyone. He wanted silence, because silence protected him. The moment I made that call, I broke part of his control. I still think about the 23 minutes and 27 seconds I spent waiting. I remember whispering to the dispatcher while he searched the neighborhood. I remember hearing his voice and wondering whether each step brought him closer. I remember the relief of seeing the police. Most of all, I remember discovering that he had been traveling toward my family's house with a baton. That was the final proof I needed. I had not exaggerated the danger. I had not misunderstood him. I had not caused his behavior. He was willing to harm me and potentially the people who tried to protect me. I do not regret surviving in the imperfect way I did. I wish I had never returned to his house. I wish I had attended the hearings and done everything possible to hold him responsible. But I cannot judge the frightened version of myself using the clarity I have now. At that time, I was trying to understand how someone I loved could smile while choking me. I was trying to accept that apologies did not mean change. I was trying to separate love from fear. Recovery did not happen in one dramatic moment. It happened slowly. It happened every time I slept without waking from a nightmare. Every time I told the story without defending him. Every time I understood that compassion for his addiction did not require sacrificing my life. Every time I stopped calling myself stupid. I survived a man who tried to control my movements, my conversations, my body, and my ability to breathe. He almost took my life more than once. He did not succeed. I am still here. That does not erase what happened, but it gives the story a different ending. I am not only the woman trapped in hotel rooms. I am not only the woman in the driver's seat with hands around her neck. I am also the woman who reached for her keys. I am the woman who ran. I am the woman who called the police while the person who hurt her shouted that only weak people asked for help. I am the woman who remained hidden for 23 minutes and 27 seconds until help arrived. I am the woman who drove past the patrol car, knowing the man who tried to kill her had finally been stopped. I am a survivor, and that is a form of power no one can take away from me.